Morning, Tracy.
Good
Thank you so
morning.
much for joining me on the podcast. Now, we
Pleasure.
were meant to meet back in March, weren't we? The end of March. And that
Yeah,
couldn't happen, sadly. So we've had to innovate, as so many people have. And here we are on Zoom. But it's lovely to be with you today.
thank you
Um,
for having me.
So tell me, how has lockdown been for you? Have you had the opportunity to be creative?
For the first month or so, I wasn't creative at all. I think, like a lot of people, I was anxious and um, didn't sleep well, and I was very distracted by the news and by this new world we had to navigate. And so it was hard to write. It was hard to read. A lot of my friends said that,
Yeah.
who usually read, said they couldn't finish anything. And I was like that too. I'd start a book and go, yeah, what's the point? But one thing that I did do in April, I was just having a hard time sleeping, and I realized I needed to stop watching the news at night or listening to it.
Yeah.
So after 7 p.m., I would cut off news, and then I thought I need to do something that's going to calm me. And a friend has just moved to France, and she is living. They're fixing up a house, and they're kind of living in a caravan at the moment. And I've always promised that I'd make her a quilt for the caravan
Ah,
and a double quilt. And I said, Lorraine, maybe now's the time. What colors do you want? And she said blue and green, and it was perfect because my husband had bought me some fat quarters back from New York in Tula pink, the
oh yeah.
and which are amazing fabrics, and I had used them to make a baby quilt. The last thing I made in orange and yellow and red, but I also had some blues and greens, and so I started. I thought I'm going to make something. I'm not going to make anything that I have to think too much about. So I'm going to show you. People can't see it, but you can see it on Zoom. I'm just doing 9-patch. It's really
Ah,
simple 9-patch that goes this way, goes down like that. So can you see
I
the
can. That's beautiful.
yeah, and the thing about it is, so it's 9-patch interspersed with plain off-white squares. So there's not too much sewing. I don't have a sewing machine. I don't use a sewing machine. I don't know how to. I have a friend every now and then who helps me with
So you
some of
can
the
knit all
sewing.
by hand.
Yeah,
Wow.
but it's real. It was great because at night I would just sit. I cut out all the squares, and I just sat and sewed, and I listened to music, calm music, either jazz or classical, and it was really soothing. And I went crazy. So like the first week, I was trying to do one row a week. It was actually not too hard to do that. And
Yeah.
as in all things that we've all done, I did 4 rows right away, and then everything kind of ground to a halt because you stop, and that's the whole thing is you need to keep the momentum up. So
Yes.
also I find as I move into summer, I'm not quite so keen on sewing because it's hot and you
It's
don't want it
hot.
in
You
your
don't
lap
want
and
all that
stuff.
fabric on top of you, and yeah.
Yeah, and
But
also the
it's really
fifth
fresh
row.
and bright.
Pardon me?
It's
It
really
is
fresh
bright.
and bright. It's beautiful.
Tula pink has a tendency to be very fresh and bright. It's got lots of different. There's a lot of sea stuff in this, blues and greens, and it's just simple squares, but they make these diagonal lines, big diagonal lines through the quilt, and
Yeah.
that looks. And I'd seen it on somebody doing this pattern. It's so simple. I saw it on Instagram or something, and I thought that's what I want to do. Something I don't have to think. I just want to. I'm a traditionalist when it comes to quilting for the most part. I don't do anything really wacky, and I just wanted something where I really didn't have to think. I just sewing straight lines the whole time, cut out squares, sew straight lines, and the only thing that went horribly wrong is that the off-white, which is a very simple little dotted, it's nothing, you can get this stuff all over the place, but all the shops are shut. So the
Yes.
local shop where I normally get this sort of thing, they had 1 meter of it, and I said of what I wanted, which is a kind of off-white. And they hand delivered it, and I was able to start on it. So I got going, and then I was able to order from another shop online more of it. So I used all the stuff, what had originally come, and then I made a fifth row, and I used the new fabric, and I was busily sewing. I sewed the whole thing together. I put the whole fifth row, and I thought, great, I'm over halfway done with this quilt. And then I saw it in the daylight, and I realized I had used the wrong white. I'd ordered the wrong white. I'd ordered white rather than off-white. And it wasn't even like you wouldn't notice the difference. You absolutely would. I was horrified. And so I had to unpick a whole row of this stuff.
Oh no!
And it wasn't just one of these squares; it was the whole. I had to unpick the whole row.
By hand. Oh,
yes,
no.
and that kind of put me off by a couple of weeks because unpicking is so annoying. It's like in writing, editing. I don't mind editing too much, but God, it is so hard in quilting. So it did put me back a bit. But I'm now ready to redo. I have the right color now. I'm ready to redo that row. Although, of course, it's not exactly the right color because, as you know, each bolt is slightly different. And I think most people won't notice it, but I was looking at the two and going, oh no. I showed them to my husband and I said, do you think is anyone going to notice this? And he said, no, that was the right answer. Tracy, nobody's going to notice it except you. And I thought, oh, thank you.
And that's
we all
so caught up with our mistakes and where it's gone wrong. And normally it's just such a tiny thing, to somebody who's never seen it before. The quilt's absolutely beautiful and would never notice those things. So we shouldn't really be pointing them out. We just need to say, here's my masterpiece. Isn't it wonderful?
Exactly. And I think one of the things I love about quilting is that we were just talking before we started recording that you have an amazing stash behind you, and it's all really carefully color coded, and you've stored it well. And mine is just all over the place in boxes in a spare room, and always needs ironing. And the thing about quilting is it can be a mess, and the back of a quilt can look a bit of a mess. But then when you iron it, it becomes less messy. And then when you actually finish it, when you bind it.
Yes.
Oh, God, that's a great feeling. And then when you finish the hand quilting, because I hand quilt, when you finish it and you block it and everything, you wash it, fingers crossed, nothing's running. And at the end, all of the difficulties you've had, all the little stitches that might not quite have worked, or that bit which is a little bit wonky, it all gets thrown away. You don't notice it at all. And so it's like life. We sort of tuck under all the loose ends, and in the end it looks fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's a little bit like writing, because I find that when I'm working on a novel, there are definitely sections that I'm writing that are harder than others, but in the end, when it's all smoothed out, when it's all been edited and it all fits together, then the reader isn't going to question any of that. And I think it's the same when you give somebody a quilt, they just look at it and go, oh, that's so beautiful, that's wonderful, I love it. And they don't look at every single stitch the way you or I would.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been spending a lot of time recently looking at, I've got a book which has all of the quilts that are in the American Museum in Britain.
Oh, yeah.
And the quilts are absolutely wonderful. And but when you look at them close up, they're not perfect. I mean, the applique is not perfect, the binding's not perfect. Sometimes they've thrown in a random fabric, maybe they ran out of some, but it just doesn't matter. And when you look at it as a whole, you just see beauty. And that's the wonderful thing about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the American Museum is in Bath, and it has the most wonderful quilt collection.
It really
beautiful.
does. Yeah. So you learnt to quilt because you were writing The Last Runaway a few years ago now. So what prompted you to include quilting in that novel?
Well, the book is about a young woman from the south of England who emigrates to Ohio in 1850. And most of the book is about the Underground Railroad, which she joins, which is a group of people helping runaway slaves escape to freedom. But it's also about being an immigrant and being different from the people around you. And there's a lot about the difference between American women and English women. And I wanted to find something that both English and American women did with their spare time that could kind of compare and contrast them. And I hit upon quilting, which is a really big in the States, and it's big here, but in the States it's huge. And I thought I started looking into the history of it, and I really loved the idea of somebody who's been brought up in a certain tradition of quilting in England, and piecework really, and then goes over to the United States and they do it differently there. And how does she respond to that? So I had a lot of fun researching. And the styles, I was thinking on Honor, who is the heroine, the English heroine, she does sort of English piecing with you know, like the things of the hexagon, the grandmother's garden, and stars and things made out of with the pieces of paper, and it's all very carefully made, and she's like that. She's very kind of buttoned up. And then when she gets to the States in the mid-19th century, there was a fashion for making red and green quilts, applique. And they're much bolder, they're much brighter, they're much more, less intricate. And she sees them as vulgar. And the Americans see her as, her quilting as, oh, it's just so precise and buttoned up, and they admired it, but they didn't want to do it themselves. And I just felt like I could play around a lot with that. And I really enjoyed it a lot. And in fact, I decided that if I was going to write about quilting, I needed to do the quilting, to learn to quilt myself, at least a little bit, so that I could describe it with some authenticity.
Yeah.
So that was, I took a class, and after the class, I joined a group of quilters who meet in each other's houses every Monday, and we all live in the same area. And I started quilting with them, and that was 7 or 8 years ago. I think 8 years I've been with him. Wow. So, and that was really wonderful. And so I've been doing it ever since. And that, I never expected when I started that I would continue it, because I have to admit, at the very beginning of the research, I had this notion of quilting as being, I liken it to, think of going to a church bazaar, and there's all these sort of stuff for sale, that people craft, things people have made, and you see like a little baby quilt that has blocks on it and ducks appliqued, and it's all a bit, you know, it's like cotton polyester cloth rather than cotton, and it's just, you just look at it and go, oh. And the thing is, quilting is not like that at all.
And sometimes
can be.
when you say you're a quilter, that's what people think quilting is.
Yes.
And it's like, actually, no, quilting isn't, it can be like that, but for me it's not like that at all. And actually, you know, it's bright, it's vibrant, it's, you know, it's wonderful.
It's artistic. Yeah. And I the first time I went to the International Festival of Quilts at Birmingham, I was just blown away by first of all the skill, the intricacy, but also the variety of what you can do with fabric and needle and thread. It's amazing. So I felt like my world was opened up. Having said that, it was opened up, but what I tend to stick to is quite simple, traditional. I'm not particularly very good. I'm slow. As I said, I don't use a sewing machine. So if I did use a sewing machine, I'd probably go much faster. And I've got a lot of other things on my plate. So it's something that comes and goes. But I love doing it because I feel like it gives me a change of pace from writing.
Yeah.
It uses a different skill set and a different part of my brain, and it's nonverbal, and I really love that about it.
It's so visual, isn't it, with all the colors and the vibrancy, and like you say, compared to writing, it is a contrast. It's creativity in a different way, isn't it?
Yeah. And I also I think I sew by hand partly because I don't know how to use a sewing machine, but also it's like when I write, I actually write by hand as well. And then I type it into the computer at the end of the day. But the quilting, I think it's my hand is so, my brain to hand is very important to me. And excuse me. I think hand quilting, it's kind of wonky, and it's not even the way a sewing machine is, and it's a lot slower, but it looks more human somehow, more authentic, And I love that about it. And maybe the writing with pen, I feel like the brain to hand connection is much stronger than brain to keyboard.
Yes, definitely. And the other wonderful thing about quilting is it can be very social. I mean, you said you are part of a group. So you imagined you'd still be in a quilting group 8 years on from when you learnt to quilt, and it really does bring people together. Writing is wonderful, but it can be quite solitary, whereas
Yeah.
quilting opens up all these avenues to connect with people that you might otherwise not have anything in common with. So do you get a lot of chance to socialize with other quilters? Have you been Zooming with them over lockdown?
We, our group has not been Zooming, but we email each other every Monday. We email with news about Monday is the day we would have met.
Yes.
And we could Zoom, but we actually rather like the email. I think it just works. It works well for all of us. And it's just been, it's been, I'm always looking forward to hearing from, and if I don't hear from one of them on Monday, I think, is she okay? And, you know, we're always checking up on each other, and quite a bit of the group is older than me. And so there's more concern for shielding and things like that.
Yes.
But, you know, everybody's fine, knock on wood, but we've all, it's been a real pleasure to connect in that way during this time.
And in a weird way, lockdown has brought people closer, hasn't it? We are more concerned with how people are doing in their day-to-day lives, and we're learning a bit more about them. And you know, that if there is any silver lining to lockdown, I think you know, personal relationships have grown a lot more than if lockdown hadn't happened. So yeah, and I still just can't get over how sewing bits of fabric together brings these communities of people together and creates lasting friendships. I just think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
So moving on then, a couple of years ago you were involved in a project called the Sleep Quilt with the prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell the listeners a little bit more about that and how you became involved in that project?
Sure. After The Last Runaway is published, I was approached, emailed by a woman who volunteers for a charity called Find Cell Work. And Find Cell Work goes into prisons around the country and teaches them to sew and to quilt and also to embroider. And it's for, they get paid, the prisoners get paid for their work, and the cushions and quilts that they make, the things they make, get sold online. And it allows them to save a little money, but more importantly, it gives them self-confidence and something to do in their cells for 23 hours a day, and helps to, it's therapeutic, and it helps to develop self-esteem. It's been going for about 20 years, and she asked me if I would, she said she taught prisoners in Wandsworth Prison in South London, and would I be willing to come in and talk to the men about my quilting? And I said, yeah. I never turned down an opportunity to do something different, and I've never been in a prison, not yet, and not until now. And so I said, sure. And so Caroline took me in, and it was a wonderful experience. The prison was very full of clanging doors and keys and gray and brown. Why did they use such awful colors for the walls? I don't know, but in the workshop, the men were happy and eager to show me what they were making. We did show and tell the way quilters always do. I showed them what I was working on, talked about quilting, and they showed me what they were working on. And it was a really wonderful atmosphere. And I had such a great time, and I admired what Find Cell Work does so much that I decided I wanted to commission them to make a quilt for me. And at the same time, I was working on, I was curating an exhibition of quilts at a place in Bexley Heath in South London, at an 18th century house, which had 5 bedrooms on the first floor that were used for an exhibition every year. And I decided to call it Things We Do in Bed. There were 5 different bedrooms, and there would be quilts that would, from all different periods, from you know, I think the earliest one was 18th century baby quilt, all the way up to an art quilt that had been made the year before. And each room had a different theme of things we do in bed. So there was a birth room, birth, sleep, sex, illness, and death. And I chose one of those subjects I thought was the least contentious for prisoners, was sleep. So I asked them to make a quilt that gave their emotions about sleep. So each prisoner had a 12-inch square, and there were 63 of them from prisons around the country, and they could design a square and make it to sort of show their emotions, their feelings about sleep, and mostly in blue and white. And they could embroider, they could quilt on the square, and then they were put all together, sewn together, and then quilted. And it was an amazing quilt in the end. Surprisingly moving, because it turns out sleep is not something that's easy in prison. A lot of things come up. You're sharing a cell with somebody you don't know. All your past decisions, bad decisions, come crashing down on you at night when you're trying to sleep. So there's a lot of insomnia, a lot of bad dreams, and that all of that came pouring out into these pictures that people made. And there were also some funny ones too, of sheep counting sheep as they were trying to sleep, and a lot of, there was humor, there was pathos. It was just amazing outpouring of emotion into this quilt, and it was so popular in the exhibition. People were just amazed by it. We entered it in the group category of the International Festival of Quilts. It came in second. And
did they know about that? Did they know?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
they were
wonderful.
Really proud. And it's been shown in various places around the country. Fine Cellwork now have it in their workshop in Battersea and hanging, and they bring it out for various events and things. And then we decided to make a book about it. And so there is a book that's available called The Sleep Quilt. Yes, which and it's a little square quilt. There's a photo of each square, and also an introduction by me. And then there's some information about Fine Cellwork, and also quotes from the men and women who worked on it. And it's really moving, beautifully photographed, and very moving. Did you get a chance to look through it?
I have, yes. I've had this book a year or so now, and yeah, I just think that it's quilting and embroidery is such a cathartic process, and it's a great way to pass the time, and it just seems like the perfect thing for prisoners to do. And there's this stereotype of the big burly muscly male prisoner who wouldn't be interested, and this is evidence that actually they are, and they are talented, and they are creative, and they do have skills, and they want purpose in their lives. And having a community project like this for them to work on, it gave them that purpose and that sense of pride when they made a quilt and finished it, and then to win the award. I mean, that must have been the icing on the cake for them. That's just wonderful.
Yeah.
So I recommend people have a look at that book, because it's really inspiring.
And also look at the website for Fine Cellwork, because it's really inspiring what they achieve with the men and women in the prisons. And as you said, you tend to think of prisoners as being these muscly, tattooed guys, and they are. And then they're sitting there quilting, like the guy who quilted the sleep quilt. All the quilting was this one Polish guy, and I visited him in his cell when he finished it, and he handed it over to me, in a kind of ceremoniously. And he was very muscly, and he used to. He spent hours every day quilting, but in between that, he'd go down to the gym and lift weights and stuff. And I asked him, do the other guys make fun of you for quilting? He said, no, because they wouldn't dare. He sort of showed his muscles. He also said, listen, I make money from this too. I mean, that's not why he does it exactly, but he was soon to be released and was going to go back to Poland and make quilts as a living. So there you go. Wow. Yeah. So I think people really admired their skill And also it's just amazing to be in a prison and there's these ugly colored walls, the gray, the brown, the sort of off-white, everything's sort of dirty and dingy. And then you have all these beautiful bright fabrics. All the stash you've got behind you that's so beautiful and bright, they're holding that in their hands, and it's just, it's so uplifting. So there was, anyway, I could go on for hours about fine cell work, but go and have a look on the website, because it's really impressive what they do.
And talking about a different type of craft, you've referred to the broderers. You feature the broderers of Winchester Cathedral in your latest novel, A Single Thread. So did you also go on a journey to learn embroidery?
Yes, I'm going to show you. Okay, so the kind of embroidery I wrote about is called canvas embroidery, and I'm holding up so that you can see. You read the book. There's the main character, the heroine, Violet Speedwell, embroiders a spectacles case for her mother's birthday, and this is the spectacles case. So I made one too.
So did you make that one?
Pardon?
Did you make this one?
Yes.
Can you just describe it so that the listeners...
It's pink and off-white and purple, and it's got various different stitches. There's a kind of Florentine stitch. There's Hungarian diamonds, for anyone who knows all the embroidered stitches. There is the rice stitch. There are various stitches that were used in embroidered cushions in Winchester Cathedral. And then she also makes a needle case for her niece. And this is the needle case. It's purple and gray and burgundy. It's got zigzags on it and lots of different stitches, again, that were used in cushions and kneelers. And I did this because the book, A Single Thread, my latest novel, is about a woman who moves to Winchester in the 1930s and ends up joining an embroidery group who make cushions and kneelers for Winchester Cathedral choir stalls. And in fact, those cushions and kneelers are still there. So if you go, you'll see them. And they're decorated with these historic scenes of history from Winchester all through the ages. So they used to say they thought that King Arthur's Camelot was in Winchester. So there's a cushion that has King Arthur's scene on it. There's a cushion that has, there's a diver named William Walker who in 1905 to 1912 dived under Winchester Cathedral and shored up the foundations because they were sagging and it was a lot of water down there. And there's a cushion that commemorates him. And there's all the kings and queens who had been married in Winchester Cathedral or ruled over England. And so there's Alfred and Matilda and Canute and Richard II and Mary Tudor. All of these cushions have emblems to them on them. And they're really beautiful, really unusual, very bright colors, yellow, blue, green, and red. And they have a kind of geometric surround to them, which is the work of a woman named Louisa Pessel, who used to, she was born in 1870 to 1947, and she knew a lot about embroidery. She worked at the V&A, and she taught embroidery, and she was responsible for this project from 1931 to 36 of making cushions and kneelers for the choir stalls. And there were over 300 kneelers made and 98 really complicated cushions, and she worked with 180 women. Some of whom had never embroidered before. And she ran that thing like a military operation and made the most beautiful work. And it's still there, and it brightens up that part of the cathedral considerably. But a lot of people just walk by and don't notice them, but hopefully they'll notice them now. So my heroine, Violet, joins this group, and she's had a difficult time because she lost her fiance in World War I and has never really recovered from that. Also lost her brother. And her family, she's been living with her mother, who's just awful, and in Southampton, and she moves just 12 miles away to Winchester, but it's like a different life. And she's 38 years old. She's what the newspapers call a surplus woman, who there are many more women than men after World War I, and a lot of women who might have wanted to marry couldn't. And Violet's just trying to forge a new life for herself, and she ends up doing that through embroidery. So that's what the book is about. And I made this spectacles case and needle case while I was writing those scenes, because again, like the quilting in The Last Runaway, in order to write about it accurately, I needed to do it myself, because it gave me ideas. It gave me, I could feel what the wool felt like. I could tell what the problems were that she had to overcome in the sewing. And so it was a lot of, it's also a lot of fun. I mean, I'm not going to continue embroidering because I have enough on my hands to unpick my quilting. so I'm not going to this time. But yeah, so that's another craft that I've ended up, and I don't even think craft is quite the right word. To me, it's artistry. It's another thing I've taken up and written about.
Mm. And why did you choose Winchester Cathedral as the focal point of that novel? Why
well, I really, I think you live in Somerset, don't you? So you've got Wells Cathedral and Exeter not far from you, and they are both beautiful cathedrals, especially Wells. Wells has some wonderful embroidery as well in the choir stalls, because they saw what was done at Winchester, and they said, let's have some of that in ours. So in the 1940s, they had a program of creating really gorgeous embroidery as well. But I chose Winchester originally because I wanted to write about a cathedral. I wanted to set a book in a cathedral, and Winchester had some wonderful stories attached to it. And what I thought I was going to write about when I went down to visit once was the in the English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell's men used the cathedral at Winchester as the stables, and they went around rampaging through the cathedral, breaking things. They broke open these mortuary chests that held the bones of kings and queens, and they threw them around, and they threw them through the Great West Window, which is this huge stained glass window, and shattered it. The townspeople gathered up the glass and hid it. And then with the restoration of Charles II in 1660, they restored the window, but they didn't restore it back to what it had been, which had been the stories from the lives of saints. They restored it higgledy-piggledy, so it looks like crazy paving. And if you go now, I encourage you to, because it's a beautiful cathedral. It's got the longest nave in Europe, and Jane Austen is buried there, and those cushions and kneelers are there. There's a wonderful bell tower. There's a lot of bell ringing in the book too. But if you go in, look up at the biggest stained glass window, and a lot of people don't notice that it actually is abstract. It's not showing anything. But they put it back deliberately that way. They said to remind us of the fragility of even a building like Winchester Cathedral. So I went down thinking that was what I was going to write about, but then I got seduced by the cushions and kneelers, and I decided to write about them instead.
Ah, I see. And do you think you will incorporate different types of crafts into future novels?
Yes, I'm working on a novel now that's set in Venice, and it is about Venetian glass. So I'm learning, especially Venetian glass beads that were used for trade and for fashion. And I'm slowly learning. Until lockdown, I'd been learning how to make them through somebody in London, and I'd done a little bit in Venice. And I'm hoping to after things get easier. But it's all about how a family who make glass through the ages. And again, it's all about the craft and the making and beauty and color and translucence and all that stuff. So yeah.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. With each novel, you really go on a personal journey as well, don't you, really?
Yes,
Learning
very much so.
skills. And then, like you say, it enables you to write in an authentic way because you've done it yourself.
Yeah.
And so I think that really helps the reader sort of connect with your writing. I think that's great. Oh, thank you so much, Tracy.
Pleasure.
Before we go, I always like to ask the person I'm chatting to offer a couple of tips to the listeners, whether it be about quilting or writing in this case, or embroidery. What
Gosh.
words of wisdom do you have?
I guess I hesitate to offer any advice to quilters because I suspect everybody listening out there is a lot more advanced at quilting than I am. But I think one thing that I would apply to both quilting and writing is it always works better if you make it for somebody. Don't just make a quilt and then just put it on a bed, not know what to do with it. If you're going to make it for yourself, that's fine, but decide that. But I like to make quilts to give away, and then I can really think hard about what colors, what they would like. And the same goes for writing. Don't just write in a vacuum. You're writing for it to be read by somebody else, unless you're writing a journal. And it's really important to remember and respect your readers, and remember and respect your quilt receiver who's going to put that quilt on their bed. And it also focuses the mind, and it makes you work towards a goal, towards a deadline. And I think that's really important. The other tip I would say for writing is they always say write what you know, and I don't actually agree with that. I think you should write what you don't know, write what you're interested in knowing about. Because a novel is a long journey, and if I get bored writing it, then the reader's going to be bored reading it. So it's really important to expand your own mind. And you could apply that to quilting. I wouldn't yet for my own quilting because I just haven't done enough of it. But if you've made many quilts all in the same type, then maybe it's time to try something new and different to really shake you up, or maybe use a different kind of fabric from what you would normally. So sometimes, for instance, a different kind of example, sometimes when I go shopping, clothes shopping, I force myself to take into the dressing room a couple of items of clothing that I wouldn't normally ever think I would wear.
Yes.
And it's really surprising to see yourself in something that isn't what you'd normally wear, because sometimes it turns out to be pretty good. And
Yes.
I think, just open yourself up to different. I think that's really important.
I agree with you. It's so easy to stay safe, isn't it? And do what you know, do what you're good at. You're in your comfort zone, but actually you're not learning and growing as a person if you do that. And you do have to challenge yourself. And you might find you don't like hand quilting or you don't like machine quilting, but you can't say that until you've given it a go. And conversely, you might actually love it and think, actually, I want to learn more about this.
That's possible.
Yeah, thank you for your tips, and thank you for your time this morning, Tracy. It's been fascinating talking with you, and I hope that you have a good rest of the summer and that you get that quilt finished sooner rather than later as well.
Me too. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay.